at county level. And I don't know whether it's just the weakness in accountability of how resources are managed at county level. I'm not sure where the gap is, but we are certainly witnessing mega corruption at county level. And as much as, yes, we want devolution to work, we want, development to go to, the various counties in Kenya. But the way the system is right now, it's not working. And I think there needs to be some sort of review, not necessarily to disband the counties, but figure out how these resources being allocated to the counties can be managed better so that they deliver value to the taxpayers. Otherwise, these are billions just going into governors and their cronies' pockets to buy, apartments and properties in Dubai, in the UK, in Europe, and, all those other places. And that's why you're having, stories about Wavinya's son being held with lots of money, in Europe. I mean, these are stories that's not the only case, that's just one case. But it just points to how much liquidity the governors have, because they have, vast resources, but you don't see the same translated in the counties that they manage. So there needs to be, we need to figure out as a country, how do we ensure that this 400 billion that's being allocated to the counties to support recurrent expenditure, but also to support development projects at the county, can actually be used so that service is delivered to the taxpayers.
Okay, let me just refer to that specific meeting. When Mbadi was appearing before the committee, there was also some heated exchange between him and the legislators. And one of the things he said is that in as much as counties are requesting for extra funding, all they need to do as counties is sit down and look at the budget lines in terms of hospitality, in terms of transport, because he believes this is where those counties can actually get that extra funding that they're looking at. Do you believe, looking at the Auditor General reports in terms of what is spent in hospitality and transport, and counties looking at those budget lines that the CS was talking about, that this is enough to sustain them?
I believe it can make a difference, because when you also look at the Auditor General's reports, and even the ones coming from the Controller of Budget, you realize that a lot of expenditure lines, a lot of money in the counties goes to travel and, hospitality and things like that. And these are things that are not, necessary, don't necessarily bring value to the Kenyan taxpayer. So if they can cut back on some of these things, you see, I think what we should do as Kenyans, the same accountability we are pushing from the national government, we want the president to do 1, 2, 3, is the same, it's with the same passion, zeal, and, fire that we should hold our county governments accountable, because nobody seems to be talking about them, but they're getting massive resources and it's not working for Kenyans. Okay.
Well, Mheshimiwa, let me come to you, Mheshimiwa Makali. Looking at this issue on the division of revenue bill, this bill is expected to reinstate that 400 billion that was in the finance bill 2024. Treasury saying they have only the 380 billion to work with following the financial constraints that we're experiencing as a country. But now, when you're looking at this equation, and your county, Kitui, being one of those 4 counties that was able to achieve this on-source revenue target, do you believe it's time that we intentionally started to look at the conversation of basically reducing these counties, because seemingly they cannot support themselves?
An interesting question, but let me say this. I think empirical studies have confirmed that Kenyans are very happy with devolution. And what is happening is that the devolution is also facing some administrative challenges. And I agree with the panelist who is saying issues of accountability should be taken seriously. But now coming to the figures, you remember initially we had actually the current Division of Revenue Act, which we passed the Parliament, was allocating counties 400.01 billion. Then, as a result of the Finance Bill 2024 being not passed, we had to rationalize the expenditure across board so that we operate within our means. So what was proposed is that where the allocation for counties be reduced by 20 billion so that it comes to 380. But at the same time, because there was a cut of about 30 billion, then it pushed the figure back again to 410. So the actual allocation for this financial year is 380. But if you look at the Act says very clearly that in a situation where revenue collection falls short of the projected amount, it is the national government to take over that portion of the shortfall. So the county's allocation should be fixed. But now this has been an abnormal kind of year because of the finance bill. The question is now, can the governors allow a situation where, even though the law says the amount should not be touched, they allow the reduction of 20 billion so that we don't go borrowing that 20 billion to give them? And I think that's where the debate should be. The debate should be, can the counties accommodate this reduction, or should the national government borrow to give them the money? And I think from the discussion on accountability, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for now for national government to go and borrow money out there to give to the counties. But all said and done, the alternative is for counties to increase their own revenue, their own source revenue, which I think has been a challenge for most of the counties. And this is basically because of the management. You know, we are telling the counties to leverage on technology, but very few of them want to go that direction, because if you digitize your revenue collection processes or systems, more likely you'll have no room for taking that money to your pocket. And to me, these are the issues we'll be discussing as Kenyans in terms of how do we make sure that the little resources we have as a country, we use them well. Because the truth of the matter is, if the resources we are collecting, we use the money well without these issues of corruption, we can actually achieve the same outcomes and outputs using the same resources we have without borrowing. And to me, I think that's where now the debate should be. Okay. Our national conversation should be at that point. How do we use the resources we have in a prudent manner to achieve the same resources with the same outcomes and outputs without borrowing?
Okay. Well, Owidi, let me come to you. There are two facets to my next question. Mheshimiwa has spoken about accountability, same as Vivian, and he says that most counties do not want to go the way of digitization because a lot will be lost in terms of misappropriation of funds. But is that really enough? And secondly, the main question here with the counties is always the size. We have too many counties that are small, meaning the economic activities in those regions cannot generate enough revenue to sustain these counties. And that is why the question was, is it a ripe time to actually look at this conversation and be intentional about it and say, you know what, maybe it's time for us to revert back to the drafters of the Constitution who sat down and thought that indeed maybe we need 13 counties?
Other than the number, the last time I was here, I made very far-reaching statements about devolution in Kenya. One of the statements I made is that devolution in Kenya should have been the devolution of resources rather than devolution of governments. Take, for example, you have a county that receives 10 billion annually from the national government. In this 10 billion, only 1 billion is used for development. It is like a man having cattle, and the people who take care of the cattle are paid 9, and the revenue the cattle is bringing is 1. We are wasting resources on many of these counties. In any case, if the national government is supposed to be compelled to reduce its expenditure, the county governments too must be ready to reduce what is due unto them. So, as I was saying about devolution in counties, the number is a good thing. But I tell you, in Kenyan politics, it will be so difficult. Because take, for example, you want to reduce the former Nyanza province, which has 6 counties, into 1. First of all, there are some people who will say the dominant community in that place will always be the governor. That is one problem. 2, those people who are eyeing the position of governors in those counties will not want to hear anything that the county they have invested in their hearts, mind, and resources to become the governors are going to be disbanded into one in which they don't stand a chance of being the governors.
Yeah.
So that is a politics that would be so costly to this country, you may not. I think devolution should be restructured because you remember in the old days, we used to have local authorities, the municipal council and so on.
Yeah.
They used to raise their own revenue, pay their staff on that own revenue, and do some development with that revenue, except some small funds that used to come from the national government, which was very small.
Yeah.
And they used to survive. But today, they are given billions, and they use those billions to run those counties and not to do development. It is a waste. And there are some counties also which raises a lot of money as on revenue.
Yeah.
But when you go there, you find staff have not been paid, resources are not there. This time there was a county that actually reached over 1 billion in on revenue. Yet, you still find some of their staff are not being paid, some of their projects have stalled. And yet they receive that on source, and they are also receiving from the exchequer. So I think we need to go back and sit and have a conference to review devolution with a view to reducing the general recurrent expenditure of counties and increasing development. Because the original reason for which we demanded for devolution is because resources were not reaching certain corners of the country. So we needed to take resources there. Instead of putting resources in front and people coming behind them to help implement projects, we took government there. We first looked for governor, their deputies, their MCAs, the employees, before we said, okay, let's send the money. The people who are already working for counties are too many for the money being sent. So we are not even achieving the original goal of taking resources to every corner of the country. We have taken governments, and governments, as you know, as she knows, are also centers of corruption.
Okay.
The very thing that made us form devolution. But we are being convinced that devolution is a good thing for this country that must not be stopped. The people convincing us are the beneficiaries of those devolutions. I had here, I talked here about last week, that every governor keeps on telling Kenyans that, you know, we have not paid our staff, we have not paid our contractors because of late remittance from the national government. But what happens when they are finally remitted? They are pending bills that are 10 years old, 8 years old, 5 years old. Are they telling us the government have not remitted the budget allocations for those bills 10 years later?
Okay. Well, looking at that conversation, most definitely a lot of questions that need to be answered in terms of expenditure. Vivian, you're looking at this allocation in itself not even achieving the threshold. People argue it doesn't achieve the 15% required threshold. And they're decrying this amount that is supposed to be given to these governments. Let's take case in scenario, for example, Nairobi County. To date, we've had issues, even after them digitizing their systems in terms of revenue collection, we still have complaints, and people argue that they don't even know where the money goes to, that there's still some issues even after digitization of that program in terms of revenue collection. So are we not then not being truthful to ourselves that leveraging technology could actually solve a bigger part of this equation? Well, there is some deeply rooted issue that we're not talking about.
The deep issue is corruption. And then I think even, this is just my theory though, I think some of these quote-unquote on-source revenue that, you know, we are being told they are meeting targets, I think it's just in theory. I don't think they are actual, like it's actual revenue that is banked somewhere and can be used to settle pending bills and salaries and stuff like that. And a lot of these governors just using PR, you know, to float by until the next election, so that again they get elected for another, you know, for another term. In my view, I agree with Owidi on the fact that the focus and the priority should have been to devolve resources, because that is what would work for the Mwananchi, not the, you know, not the structure of government itself. But granted, we are already here. It, like he says, it will be very, very difficult to try and say that, you know, we are collapsing some counties. As it is, there are people who want their own counties. Even now, as people are having conversations about reducing counties, there are some communities that are still insisting and pushing on having more counties created, you know, which is not feasible, because if we're supposed to have a county for each and every community in Kenya, goodness, I don't know how many counties we are going to have. So maybe we already have the 47. We just have to figure out how do we restructure it so that this thing works for us, and it's not just a conduit for siphoning money, you know, from treasury or from on-source revenue or from wherever it is money is being collected that needs to be, you know, providing service for Kenyans. But I want to repeat this because it's something I think that keeps falling through the cracks. The way we are holding the national government accountable, always talking about, say, even the finance bill at the national level, what as Kenyans are we doing at the county level? Do you know, how, the budget that your county has for, say this financial year? Do you hold them accountable? Do you know how much they're collecting, how much they're spending? Do you read the reports? The same zeal we have in saying we want competent people in cabinet, we want competent people at the national government, in the executive, is the same zeal we should be having when it comes to electing MCAs. At the county level. It's the same zeal we should be having when CECs are being vetted, It's the same level of passion we should have and say, no, so-and-so does not meet the threshold. Why should they be, appointed in such and such a position? Because these are funds, these are taxpayers' money. Okay.
Well, Mheshimiwa Makali, just before I let you go, there's a concern that I've just received from one of our viewers right there, and he's a business owner. So the concern right here is, just back to what we were discussing earlier on, our fiscal deficit, the focus stands at about 689 billion. This has to be funded through borrowing. And looking at our debt obligations, we have the external and the domestic borrowing. Chances are that the government is going to heavily borrow domestically. And of course, financial institutions are going to go with the government vis-a-vis going with normal business operators and Kenyans, because their risk portfolio is looking better than the normal Kenyans. So he's asking your role as legislators in protecting them to ensure that in as much as we have this fiscal deficit that is rising, they are protected locally, to see to it that the government does not heavily borrow domestically so that it doesn't necessarily affect the access to credit.
As Parliament, every financial year we do fix the total amount to be borrowed. And I'm sure Kenyans are aware of what we call the medium-term debt strategy, which is prepared every year. In that strategy, there is a lot of analysis in terms of the borrowing mix. That is in terms of how much do you borrow externally, how much do you borrow internally. And as Parliament, our push has always been that borrow externally, because externally you are likely to get concessional loans as opposed to commercial loans, which are concessional loans are normally cheaper than the commercial ones. But the challenge has been, if you analyze our fiscal deficit, the projected year in, year out, actually we call it a moving deficit, because they hardly stick to the deficit. For example, if you take the immediate just financial year, the projected one was about 4.4 when we started the year. At the end of the year, we ended up with 5.7. So this idea of supplementary budgets, this idea of changing budgets, keeps on making the budgeting process so unpredictable to a level that you can't plan anything. And one of the best practices in terms of budget making is that you must have a predictable budget, so that if you do a budget for July, you can say by the end of June the following year, you only have done about one supplementary budget to factor in cases which you could not avoid. But this is a situation in Kenya where we're talking about supplementary budget 1, supplementary budget 2, even at times you want to talk about 3. It just shows that our budget-making framework is in a message. And I think we really need to take it serious. As a profession in that area, I would want to see a situation where we make our budget, and even though supplementary budgets are allowed by law, you don't do so many of them, because it shows that your framework is not then stable.
Okay, all right. Well, just as we wind down, I want to give you all an opportunity to give us the closing remarks. And I just want to end by, we've seen a shift in government, and many people are not happy about it. Some people are happy about it. John Mbadi coming into this Treasury docket. A lot has to be done. Will he succeed or not, in your own view?
John Mbadi is one of the most brilliant economists and financial managers in this country.
Yeah.
I have listened to the way he answers questions. It is a cocktail of political answers and economic answers and financial answers. I think if there is anybody who is going to succeed, it is John Mbadi. In any case, John Mbadi is the first finance minister in this country that I also hear engages both the public and the technical team in equal measure. And I think that is going to underline his success.
All right. Vivian?
I agree with Oidi on that. There are a few things we agree on. Yeah, I think John Mbadi was an excellent choice for CS Treasury, and we wait to see how they'll steer the budgeting process, and come next year 2025, what the finance bill will be like, as opposed to the subsequent ones that we've had. But I think my final remarks is we need to, this education crisis, something needs to be done. We can't have a crisis on all levels of education, JSS, school banning, now universities, teachers are on strike, lecturers are on strike. I mean, education is the one thing that, Kenyans use as an equalizer. It is what allows you to get opportunities that you would not have had without this thing. So can we at least get this one basic, and it's a right of every Kenyan that's enshrined in the Constitution. Government needs to get its act together, the CS education and, everybody, all agencies within the education sector need to work together to resolve these issues so that children can go to school peacefully.
All right. Thank you very much for those sentiments. That is where we end New Dawn today. A big thank you to Honorable Makali Mulu, who serves as a member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee in the National Assembly, as well as Vivian T, who's our Communication and Public Affairs expert. Of course, we can't fail to recognize Ta. I realized that when I was doing the outro. It's because I'm doing this.
Don't make people think I broke the tea.
It's Vivian Ta, as well as Odoyo Oidi, who's the chairman of the Lake Basin Development Authority. A big thank you to you guys for making time for the segment right here. New Dawn. I'm Alan Owino. Of course, the repeat segment will be airing on as from 10 a.m. But we'll leave it as that. Do have yourselves a good one.